Welcome to BW Business World. Today we are here at Gurugram chapter of Indian Business Literature Festival, where business meets wisdom. Today I have with me Mr. Nikhil Arora, who is author, broadcaster and corporate leader, and we are here to discuss how has leadership evolved, and also about his book, that's The Subtle Shifts of Radical Change, Navigating the Everyday Shifts in Business, Work and Leadership in the Post-COVID World. Welcome.
Thank you.
So good to have you. You talk about leadership in your book and also managing work on daily basis. What was the inspiration behind writing this book, first of all?
My first inspiration was my dad, because when I was a child, he used to make me research about disaster management plans, crisis management plan, business continuity plan, and I used to find such a waste of time. Then I'm like, why is he making me do this? And when COVID hit, I realized we were in a crisis, we were in a disaster, and business was not as usual. And really I thought about him, and I said that this is a time for me to bring back what I learned from him. And I started thinking about when I was getting on these Zoom calls, and everybody was sharing a different experience. And I felt like this is the first time you're talking to people on video calls where everybody has a different perspective.
That's right.
And I thought this is time to institutionalize and capture these learnings. And at that point, it wasn't about writing a book, but I wanted to capture the learnings. But as I was capturing them, slowly they became such a depth of knowledge that I said it's worth putting into a book.
It was all unprecedented for everybody, and that's the reason everyone has their different opinion. Apart from fundamentals of leadership, there has been addition to, let's say, dynamics of leadership. What was that? Of course, we talk about compassion and collaboration, but what more?
So I think, first of all, leadership was all about, from entitlement to humility. I talk about a lot of leaders, when they are in positions of higher authorities or responsibility, sometimes the entitlement thing starts getting into your day-to-day work, right? And so you have to always remember leadership is about always being a servant of your employees, because you've been given a gift. So having a very humble approach to leadership, because you're bringing along a team of people who perhaps want to be what you are today, right? So how you're navigating their success, not your own success, because if you make them successful, you will certainly be successful. Secondly is also about making sure that you build a trust. I think COVID brought this trust deficit, or high trust factor very kind of prominent, right? Because employees really stuck with the companies where they had high degree of trust. And thirdly was purpose, right? You had to remind employees that you are doing more than just for your business. So whether it's helping communities, helping fundraising, giving back to society, because that's really what got everybody thinking that I have to do more than what I do for myself, because it's a very unusual time.
So humility and trust,
Humility, trust, and just making sure you're building the purpose of your employees.
We are right now in the age of startups. We are, witnessing young leaders coming up and emerging. We talk about smaller businesses managing, and when we look at the leaders who are young, they need to develop that particular leadership muscle. According to you, what needs to ensure, and also when specifically they are addressing that employee base, that's millennials and Gen Zs, when they are very specific of their needs and wants at some particular workplace, what are some of the major pointers a young leader should ensure for their younger employee base?
So first of all, everybody should have two mentors. One is older and one is younger. And I'll tell you why. The older mentor gets you the wisdom and experience. The younger mentor will tell you what is coming in the next 10, 20 years. And a lot of people just have always a one set of mentor who normally is an older person than you, because you feel like that's what you need. But in this so much fast changing world of technology and startups coming all over the place, having a younger mentor helps you stay agile, connected. How that consumer is thinking today may be very different than the older mentor you have and the decision making, right? So just having the right set of mentors, these two, and then making sure you're spending quality time, not just once a quarter or something. Shadow them, go with them, spend time in real situations with them, because practical learning from mentorship is far more powerful than academic learning, because they can tell you something which you can perhaps read in a textbook. But when you're out there practically on the street, whether it's how you're running a business or meeting your customers or going to a supplier, having them observe how they are operating give you far more knowledge.
In this book, you mentioned a particular framework called GDP. What does it mean? And also, someone said earlier in the day that this year will be the employer's year. Given that we have recently witnessed the great resignation and massive layoffs across corporates, or let's say startups. So what is GDP? And of course, what would be your advice to young leaders how to manage these turbulent times?
So GDP essentially, G stands for government role in private sector. D stands for deglobalization and digitization, and P stands for purpose and people. And essentially, I'll give you the highlights of what G means. Is I think for the first time, businesses cannot operate in a vacuum without interacting with the government like they used to in the past, right? Because if you're a private company, the only time you want to deal with the government is, okay, you're doing something with taxation, or you're doing something which you need to comply with. Other than that, you were not doing active cooperation, or what we call the public-private partnership model, right? So now every company has to have in place, because you don't know when the next lockdown will come. You don't know where you need a community building activity happening in your neighborhood, how you're impacting the infrastructure in your neighborhood. So as a leader, as an employer, government relations becomes a very proactive part of your strategy. Deglobalization is where we are seeing a lot of countries now looking inward, India being an example, which is actually to an advantage that now with the world getting into a recession, India is still not going to see that because of high domestic consumption, right? So instead of looking outward, we're looking inward, and the rate of digitization is obviously increased 10x. Online adoption has gone through the roof, so people's behaviors have changed when they order grocery or when they pursue education. And lastly, I think having a purpose of the company is far more important than in the past. Like, everybody has a purpose, but nobody really engages their employees, their people, into the purpose, right? So now employees will stick to your organization if you're engaging them with a purpose. Not that I sell a product and, hey, that's the best thing I want to do, right? Nobody gets up in the morning and gets excited that I'm going to sell 100 of these products. They'll get up and say, okay, I'm going to make a difference in some form of structure in the industry I'm working in.
So good to know that we need to have purpose in place to make that large-scale impact. You just said in your conversation that leadership is a gift of being a servant. I don't know. Could you please elaborate or build up on this?
Yes, because it's really what I say is some leaders think it's an entitled position, and the other think it's a person of humility and servant. Because ultimately, you became a leader because you were chosen by the people to be a leader, not just because you were smarter than them. It's just that you got the opportunity. So I think the servant approach keeps you humble and grounded. It always keeps you keeps the right objective in perspective, where what is the role of leaders, right? What I say is greatness is in all of our employees. How do you unpack that greatness and make them great? We are not here to create greatness in them. A lot of time leaders think I'm going to make this person from X to Y. They will make themselves from X to Y. We don't have a role. What our role is to make sure, are we giving them the right environment? Are we giving them the right process? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, is the environment trustworthy? Is the environment trustworthy? Do they feel motivated enough? Do they feel engaged enough? Do they feel connected enough? And that's all qualities of a servant, right? Because when you're serving, the best comes out of you. If you're demanding, nothing good comes out of you.
What, according to you, are the three most important things a young leader or any leader in today's time should have?
I think firstly, they should always look at their employees and people as the biggest asset. There is this true north principle, right? That if you're in the mountains or somewhere and you're gasping for, there are three things, right? Food, water, and air. What will you go first? Air, because that's oxygen, and that is your employees. And you want to make sure your people who stay with you will always be with you, whether in this company or other company, right? So make sure you're focusing on building good teams and engaging good teams and building trust within that teams. Second is make sure you look at your customers in a way as your teachers, because a lot of time we think we know what customers want. No, we don't know what customers want. We have to go out and find. And the real way to find out is, go out in the street, actually spend time in real customer environment, not get research reports, because those are bad photocopies of photocopies because somebody did a research, right? So really so go spend time, you go and observe a customer's environment, you'll find out what works, what doesn't. And I think lastly, build kind of the right processes, because ultimately that's what enables employees to succeed in a process, right? I mean, are you meeting heavy? Are you, kind of having too large a team so that it doesn't become too political and so on, right? So making sure as a leader, your job is to make sure you got the right people, you know what customers are, you have the products, but now the process needs to move, right? And the process you have to diagnose to say, is it fast enough? Is it nimble enough? And is it a team too large, not too large, right? There's a famous saying that don't have a team which can, feed more than 2 pizzas. Because they said, hey, if you have a team which requires more than 2 pizzas, it's too big a team, right? So pizza is not what I eat for a healthy reason, but the analogy stays that you want to have a small, nimble team.
Good to know. Good to know. And who are the thought leaders, or let's say business leaders, do you admire? I'm sure the list can be long, but
yeah, I mean, first of all, I just met Mr. Kiran Karnik, who's been a mentor of mine. One of the most humble person. If you talk about humility, I mean, there's no better example than him. And you're in a room with him, he knows probably more than many of the people in the room, but he will never come across, like that. He's been a great mentor. But in terms of, I think, global leaders, I would say Mr. Jack Welch, who was, he had, of course, issues later on, but I think what he did at GE was, something, process, giving an example,
so
was
good
great.
To know. My final question, one prediction, how would the future of work look like?
Future of work will look like hybrid. I think maybe it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, but it certainly won't be work from home, because I don't think that's productive for neither the employees and the employers.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was a lovely conversation.